Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Process Podcast. Mr. Carmichael, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
What's that shirt you have on there?
This is our lunchtime crew shirt from our fitness league.
Yes, I'm wearing the AM crew shirt for the fitness league. I'm currently in Smurf blue. You are in a beautiful maroon red.
Yeah, I think we definitely got the lucky straw here with the maroon. It's looking fantastic.
Folks listening, we have a fitness league that we run every year in conjunction with the CrossFit Open. So we basically take our membership and we split them into the time of the day that they most frequently train. That includes personal training clients, remote clients, and people in our group classes who follow the Perform Compete. And they will represent their team over the 3 weeks of the CrossFit Open and accumulate points each week. And at the end of the 3 weeks, we will have the fittest team. Did you, as a captain, get to choose your colour? Because I'm not a team captain. I didn't get the call up. I'm just a pleb, which is a part of the program.
No, I think it was our sponsors that got to choose the colours.
And you've got Earned Athletic.
We have got Earned Athletic.
Great company.
Fantastic company.
Well, I'm sponsored by FitAid, also a great company, I should say. Yep. But I'm not sure about blue. I don't think blue's a great colour on me, to be honest.
It's a nice blue though.
It is a nice blue. I think I'm more, if it was a navy blue. Oh, navy blue, is that what I mean? A dark blue.
Yeah, like it's sort of like a midnight navy.
Oh
yeah.
I think I look good in midnight navy. Anyway.
Debatable.
Liam, how's your day been?
My day's been great. Obviously we're still in our closures with gym here in Hong Kong. So still
week 7, I think.
Week 7. Still relatively busy. I mean, we're using this opportunity to do lots of renovations in the gym. And then in terms of one-to-one coaching, we're still got the opportunity to do our PT outside, which super grateful for that. And we had our PD this morning and also trained. So it's been a very busy day, and I also got some programming in, and it's 4:30. So it's been a very busy day, but very good day.
Awesome. We're here to talk about programming. Myself and yourself have been talking a lot about programming recently because we have been creating course content for the process programming. So it's something we have in the pipeline, and we've been working and chipping away at this for a long time with Mr. John So Tangy, who's with us right now behind the camera. And we've been chipping away at this course, and the goal is to deliver an individual coaching course as well as a group coaching course to coaches around the world, but specifically to those who are part of the Process Programming Affiliate Program. We have massive goals in terms of what we want to do there. Essentially, the goal is to upskill and increase the level or the quality of strength and conditioning CrossFit gyms around the world. So this is just going to be a part of it. But this Monday we were talking about programming and kind of our process that we follow when it comes to writing a training program, whether it's for individuals or groups. And we thought today would be a good chance to talk about the approach that we take when writing some of our group programs. So Liam, you are head coach and programmer for the Build program. Yep. And I write the programs to Live, Perform, Compete in the Elite program. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the Live and the Build program because we feel that the goals of those two programs are similar-ish. They're not really centered around competition or sporting performance. And then we're going to do another series of episodes on the Perform and Compete program and then the Elite program. Yeah. So Liam, firstly, tell me about the Build program. What is the goal of the Build program?
I think essentially what we are trying to do is we're trying to cater for people that maybe want to just look good and move well. Maybe our general avatar, the people that we're trying to attract to the program, is maybe someone that's maybe done CrossFit for a couple of years in functional fitness and have kind of got to that stage in life where they're maybe feeling a bit burnt out. Maybe they've been in a group program and their joints feeling a bit sore and just generally feeling a bit iffy. So just dialing back on intensity and just setting them up with really good principles around some bodybuilding and some aerobic conditioning. So essentially we're just trying to build muscle or develop strength, build muscle, and just develop that aerobic system. With our aerobic stuff, generally we keep it to cyclical. There is some muscle endurance where we'll maybe go mixed, but it's very basic movements when it comes to our mixed conditioning.
So in terms of the resistance training that you have in the Build program, obviously when I think about the word build, I think about like building muscle, building strength. What type of movements or exercises do we typically see in the program?
So range from anything from powerlifting movements. So we've got our bench, we've got our back squat, we've got our deadlift, and then we've also got everything in between. So we use barbells, we use kettlebells, we use machines, we use cables, we use bands. It's really fun in terms of me when I'm programming for the Build, because you can have fun with different types of equipment. Generally, the people that are doing our program, they've got access to a lot of different equipment. So maybe they're in some global gyms, So it's just fun in terms of writing that program.
We don't do any Olympic lifting in the build program.
We do not. We have done in the past. We've done some power variations of the clean, and you will see from time to time maybe some dumbbell hang power snatch, or maybe like a dumbbell hang power clean, but definitely no squat snatching or squat cleaning heavy.
Awesome. So I think the goals of the LIVE program, and why we decided to group these two together, the goals of the LIVE program is it's a mixed modal program. So we're combining facets of monostructural exercise with resistance training, with weightlifting, with gymnastics. I guess at a basic level, the movements that we see in the CrossFit program, or in the sport of CrossFit, I should say. But the goal is general health, body composition, longevity. So essentially, it's we want people to live long and prosper, but we also want carryover into everyday life. We're not trying to peak people for the sport of CrossFit here. We're not trying to prep people necessarily for the CrossFit Open, although a lot of our LIVE athletes will do the CrossFit Open maybe in a scaled division, but that is not the objective. So like you, we're not really prepping our LIVE athletes for a specific date or a specific competition, nor are we using competition to define the success of our athletes. So what would one achieve by following the build program, Liam?
I think it's very similar to the LIVE program. So we're obviously trying to err on the side of longevity. Like, we want people to come in to do their 60, 90-minute session and feel really good, like leave that gym, and we want them to feel accomplished and ready to take on the day. What we don't want to achieve is we're erring on that side of too much intensity, and we've all been in that boat where we leave the gym and we can't really continue with our day. And most of our demographic with the people that we deal with, it's maybe people that work in a business, maybe fathers, maybe mothers, and we want them to leave the gym feeling good. So that's one of the main objectives of the build program.
Yeah, I think it's very similar for us. Like, we want to touch for the LIVE Pro. We want to touch on lots of facets of fitness, including the basics of Olympic lifting. So we're looking to make our athletes strong and powerful, but also build muscle, hypertrophy. But we also want people to be enduring in all senses of the word. So for us, we have a much broader spectrum of fitness that we're trying to develop, and we probably have more tools that we can use within our toolbox for exercise prescription, because we have things like, we want to teach the basics of like kipping. We want to teach people we want to develop the strength, the mobility, and of course, eventually the technique of how to perform linked kipping, let's say toes to bar, leg raises. We also want to teach people how to execute cleans and jerks or cleans and push presses in a low fatigue based setting, but also a high fatigue based setting. So I'd say the complexity that we see in the LIVE program is probably going to be higher than that of the build program. But the goals of the LIVE program aren't necessarily just built around building muscle, and looking and feeling good. There is kind of like a sporting performance side to the LIVE program that attracts people to that versus, let's say, just a regular HIIT program or just like a bodybuilding program.
And in the LIVE program, there is no squat snatching, correct?
Correct.
Why is that?
Good question. I think that when it comes to exercise selection in the LIVE program, we're trying to find that balancing point between giving athletes complexity and challenge, because you want people to learn new skills. That's fun. And I think that's a big part of the longevity piece as well, is if you're just doing the same things over and over and over again, a couple of years down the line, you might get bored. So we want to make sure we're challenging people and giving people appropriate challenge. But we have to always ask the question, is there carryover of this into everyday life? We look at the majority of people who follow our LIVE program, they're training between 3 to 5 days a week. If I've only got 3 to 5 60-minute opportunity to train someone, does a squat snatch and teaching someone to do that movement have value and carryover? Is that the most bang for your buck thing that we can be doing in that limited time that's going to have carryover to life? Probably argue that I can't think of too many movements in life where you're going to have to grab your hands on something in a wide grip, pull it over your head and perform a squat at the same time. So whereas something like a clean and a push press, I think has a lot more carryover. Agreed. Picking up an object, picking up your child, getting something off the floor and putting it into a cupboard. When we used to get in airplanes, remember back in the day,
with that overhead locker,
getting it into that overhead locker. So I think a clean and push press actually does have a lot more carryover than something like a snatch. Similarly, like a pull up is something we want to be able to achieve with all of our LIVE athletes, male, female, regardless of age. But a muscle up and teaching someone the complexity of movement required to get in up and over a bar, that again, I can't see much carryover into everyday life. If someone wants to jump on top of a wall and pull themselves over it, I think it's a good idea to develop and cultivate strength in the dipping pattern and the pulling pattern in form of pull-ups and dips and all other variations, but I don't think we actually need to spend time teaching the technique and the nuances of how to link that all together and muscle up. So something we talked about in our course in one of our recent chapters that we covered was the step-by-step process that we go through when it comes to designing a training program for an individual. And I think we coined these terms. I know OPEX call it the 3 Ps, and we really like that classification model of designing a program. But essentially, it starts with the planning phase.
Yep.
From the planning phase, we move to the prioritizing phase. What are the priorities of this macro, meso, microcycle, and then periodizing. So planning, prioritizing, periodizing. So what we're going to do now, Liam, we're going to flip-flop back and forth in the Build and the Live program. We're going to go through each of those categories and talk about, I just want to hear what your thought processes are when it comes to designing that program. And of course, I'm asking you, the way that I say that, it's like I have no idea what you're doing, but obviously we design these programs together and we talk about it every week. But for the sake of this podcast, that's how we're going to do it.
Let's do it.
Let's start, Liam, with planning. So the first thing I think about when it comes to planning is, in terms of training frequency, training days, how many days a week does a Build athlete train?
So we've got 5 days. We used to only have 4 when we focused just on resistance training, and then we decided that also a really good facet of fitness is aerobic development. So we added a 5th day, which falls on a Saturday. So we've got total 5 days to play with.
What's the split?
So at the moment we are doing full body. We're doing.
Sorry. Before you get into that, because I know what you're getting all excited.
I'm getting excited.
What are the training days in the Build program?
So we've got a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is our rest or active recovery day, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday.
Because I remember when we first created the Build program, we thought that someone who's going to want to be a part of the Build program has probably had enough of doing aerobic conditioning.
Yep.
And so we thought, actually, let's just move away from aerobic conditioning altogether and let's just get people strong and really jacked, was essentially, in a nutshell, what we were trying to do. And I think from the feedback we were getting from our subscribers around the world following the program was that actually people were kind of wanting some aerobic capacity. And when we went back to the goals of the Build program, we realized, you know what, actually, the aerobic system is such an important integral part of health if prescribed correctly. We're not doing HIIT training or trying to smash people, but it's an important part of fitness, and we thought, therefore, it should be included in it. So 5 days a week.
Yep.
Rest days, Wednesday and Sunday.
Wednesday is our rest day and Sunday, yes.
And how long is each session? How long will it take from start to finish?
Generally, we're trying to get in anywhere between 60, I'm going to say 75 to 90 minutes. Generally, well, that's including your optional accessories. So if we took the optional accessories away, you're working about 60 to 75 minutes. How
many people actually do the accessory work?
I would say probably all of our subscribers are doing the accessory work.
That's awesome. Yeah, when we talk about a Live program, we are following a similar split. We have a Monday, Tuesday. We actually rest on Wednesday. Then we train Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then we rest on Sunday. So similarly, a 5-day split. I think it's an important thing to talk about there because I know that I haven't really come across many other CrossFit programs, or I should say mixed modal programs, or I should say programs which are being run in affiliates, which is what the Live Perform Compete program is, as well as individual subscribers, that are actually following a 5-day split. Most gyms will follow a 7-day split or a 6-day split and have one rest day. So we actually decided to make it a 5-day split because what we realized when we first started as a CrossFit gym back in 2013 was that no one could sustainably attend 6 to 7 days of training every week in the long term. Even if there were easier days and harder days, people had to miss sessions. And because from the start we were really structuring and putting a lot of thought into our programming, what it meant was that people were missing 1 to 2 days every single week. And because it was a structured program, it meant people were missing like pretty important parts of the training program. Maybe they were not getting touches on a certain movement or a certain facet of fitness that was trained on that day. They just weren't getting touches on it. So we tried doing things like rotating the focus each day so that if people always missed a Friday, for example, they were getting it maybe in another week, but still the frequency just wasn't high enough. So we decided, let's just go with a 5-day split. That's a little bit more manageable. Even the most committed folks in the world are generally training about 5 days a week, maybe with like an active recovery day. So we actually went ahead and actually implemented that in our gym. And I remember when we first did it, we had a lot of people saying,
A lot of pushback, right?
Yeah, like I'm paying for a membership and I'm only getting 5 days of training here a week, which is a totally valid reason to actually raise a point there. So what we ended up doing was then creating other classes to supplement the live program. So we basically started up an Olympic lifting class, so a barbell club. Now we have prerequisites that a live athlete must be able to meet. But because we do have live people who follow the live program who've been following it for 5-6+ years now. So from a training age perspective, I would say they're like more of an intermediate individual, but they have no interest in competing.
Yeah.
They don't want to do the CrossFit Open. Got no interest in competing in local and regional competitions, but they also do want to get some Olympic lifting. They enjoy snatching. They like the challenge of learning a new skill. So we created the barbell club with some strict prerequisites they must be able to meet. And so we put that on the rest day for our live athletes. And so we do give our live athletes a chance to get more training in if they want to, but the way that we design or program those barbell club sessions is definitely a little bit less intense, a little bit more skill and technique focused.
And I think that's one of the things I actually love about that opportunity for live guys. It's like we're not putting that you must do a squat snatch into live. We're setting some parameters for that live program. And if the person's maybe been in the gym 6 to 8 months or maybe a year, whatever it is, and then they decide, actually, I want to learn that as a skill into the barbell club, well, they have that option as well. I think that's a really good opportunity for live guys that maybe do want to snatch, because who's to say, like, you're in live, you can't snatch. You still have that opportunity, right?
And I think as well, it's an important concept to understand is that the live is not necessarily like a beginner program.
Yeah.
We don't look at our live, perform, compete program as beginner, intermediate, advanced. We look at it first and foremost from a goals perspective. Like our live athletes are they love mixed modal fitness. They want to challenge themselves and learn new movements, learn new skills, be fit across the board, but they just don't want to compete.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Perform, compete athletes, they are paying the price of admission to actually following a program which is geared around a sport. And the price of admission is like there is a chance of injury. It means the intensity is going to be a little bit higher. That may not be, quote unquote, the healthiest thing to do. But when we play sport, we're not doing it necessarily all for health. What we're trying to do as programmers is trying to find a balance between creating progress in a sport, but also keeping people as healthy as possible. And that's the longevity part.
And I think just in terms of those intentions, right, I think what we do really well here at the Process Programming is that we lay out the intentions of each program, and each individual that's coming to us, they know what they're getting themselves into, right? We have the conversation. We have an initial consultation for individuals that want to come into our group program. There's not very many gyms in the world that do that. And when we sit down, we ask the question, like, what's your goals? And then from there, we decide, okay, we think maybe the Perform program is going to be best for you. Can you meet those prerequisites?
Yeah.
If yes, let's go. Right, maybe that live program is going to be more suitable. Maybe even the compete program is going to be more suitable. But I think just in terms of how we lay it out, there's not very many gyms that do like we do. For sure.
And I think it's an important thing for us to talk about right now is that the build program is programmed. We have people around the world who are individual subscribers who follow the build program. So the build program is not a program we run in an affiliate. Yeah. So it's not designed to, basically be friendly to the equipment an affiliate may own or be necessarily pigeonholed to a 60-minute window. Yeah. The live program is, we have affiliates who follow it and basically implement it as a class, but we have individuals who follow it as well. And like you said, there's accessory work which kind of lengthen the sessions out. Each session is 60 minutes, but you have a chance if you follow the accessory work to be probably more like a 90-minute session. Yeah. Going back to the barbell club, I do think having those options are good as well, because if you do have an individual in the live program whose goals change over time, let's say they've been training and following the live program for a few years now, and they've stopped whatever sport they were doing on the side, or perhaps this is the first time they've ever done sport, and they actually make the decision to say, I actually want to kind of try this CrossFit Open thing. Yeah. I want to set myself a goal to be able to meet the prerequisites for the Perform program, and I want this to be my new thing. By having the barbell club there, it's a great way to transition people from the live program into the Perform program.
Agreed. Versus
suddenly, stepping into Perform program because you meet the prerequisites, but you've never done a snatch before. You may, we have in the Perform program, you must be able to perform like a light overhead squat. If you've never done a snatch before, then, the learning curve is very steep and
very different.
Yeah, that's not what we're trying to get out of the program. In terms of prerequisites, we talk about planning here. What are the prerequisites for the build program?
So I think generally we go off, so like we look at our we just look at the 6 patterns. So we look at obviously like, can you perform squats a certain percentage of your body weight, 10 reps? Then we look at your hinge pattern. We look at an RDL. Can you perform X, Y, and Z? And then we just go down the patterns. We look at single leg stuff. So we're looking at unilateral. Then we look at some core endurance. We're looking at side planks and etc. And then from there, that allows us. Why we have these prerequisites, it just gives us an opportunity as coaches that once that person is in the program, we now know that that person could perform X, Y, and Z. You're not thinking about having to scale and give so many other options, because we already know if you're in this program, you've passed the prerequisites, and it just makes it easier for us coaches.
Gives us just way more, as a programmer, gives you so much more confidence in knowing
100%.
What I'm writing here is going to be able to be performed as it's prescribed by everyone who follows the program. And I think introducing those prerequisites, which we have for all of our programs, and I don't think there's too many other programs in the world that have prerequisites. You know, if you put yourselves in our shoes now, we've been in a position many times where we have, turned to someone down who wants to be a part of the Live, Perform, Compete program because they don't meet the prerequisites. We've obviously offered a solution to try to get them to meet the prerequisites, but if they can't do the basic functions what we want, or what we deem is important before joining the Live program or the Build program or any of our programs, then unfortunately they can't be a part of it. And that's not only to give us assurance as programmers to ensure that people are getting the right stimulus, it's also from a safety perspective. We know that so many injuries occur when the loading or the volume or the intensity of the training was just inappropriate for the individual, and that's where they break. We want to avoid that ever happening. Again, going back to longevity, that's so important for us. So for our Live program, our prerequisites is that we need someone to essentially be able to place their arms over their head in somewhat of a stack position without creating excessive lumbar extension. That essentially is going to qualify someone to be able to press overhead without putting their back in danger. We're looking for basic strength markers are obviously perform a bodyweight squat with hips below parallel. We're looking for good hinging mechanics, unloaded. We're looking for someone to be able to perform 8 split squats on one side, 8 split squats on the other side. We're looking for someone to be able to hold themselves in a front plank on their hands for 30 seconds. And we're looking for someone to hang off a bar for 30 seconds. We know that if people can do all those things, then they're probably in a position to start to learn how to do resistance training in every way, shape or form.
Well, I think especially here at Coastal, what we do, and especially with all the other affiliates that we work with, is that we have the prerequisites, but from that, then that Live person will then go into our fundamentals program where we've got 5 sessions for them to complete. And that's when we're dialing into the basics of the squatting pattern. We're learning how to brace, we're learning how to back squat, we're learning how to front squat, we're learning how to hinge effectively with a barbell, and etc. We're just essentially moving them in so that when we get to their first class, they're confident. No one wants to turn up to their first group class. You're already a bit nervous, right? No one wants to turn up and like the coach is saying dumbbell, RDL, barbell. You've got no idea what's happening, right? So I think that yes, we're teaching them the skills, but we're also giving them the confidence and that, again, that autonomy. So essentially they're going to be able to do this on their own in the future to go into the class and be confident, right?
Yeah. And again, like, put yourself into the shoes of a coach coaching a class. How many times, in other CrossFit gyms, I certainly know back in the day with Coastal when we first started, when you have a new member join your class, it's actually quite scary. Sometimes, you end up just hand-holding that client throughout the entire first session, and probably, to be honest, the first month of training. And whilst that's great, it makes that person feel welcomed and looked after, you actually neglect everyone else in the class.
You've got 10 other people that you're not talking to,
yeah,
right?
And so the quality of coaching as a whole actually decreases quite substantially, which means that your service offering to everyone in your class is significantly reduced. And I think that's really important. So for us to now know when someone graduates fundamentals, they've passed the movement assessment, they've gone through 5 sessions at least, where we know their general knowledge of movement and understanding of how to read a program, how to execute the movements we're going to see in the program is at a certain level. That gives us a lot of confidence to be able to just go with the flow and get straight into coaching, which is awesome. Let's talk about prioritizing. So when we talk about prioritizing, this is where we're starting to think about actually designing a training cycle. Myself and Liam have been going back and forth on whether we should call it cycles or blocks, because we both use both all the time and it's very confusing.
We have voted on cycle.
We've decided
I'm just
on
waiting
cycle.
for Ed to say block.
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it.
Sure.
I'm sure. So when it comes to prioritizing or creating the priorities for a training cycle, we have to think about a few things. We talk about, or we just talked about in our course, explain the concept of macro cycles, mesocycles, and microcycles. Truth be told, we don't usually talk about those three words. I think they're very fancy, very strength and conditioning, periodization-y words.
Yeah.
They get thrown about a lot. But essentially what we mean by those three terms, the macro cycle is like, well, what is the overall goal of the program? And you may be looking at something like a 12-month basis. When we talk about the mesocycles, we're basically talking about, okay, of the 12 months, the general goal for the next 12 months, how are we going to break down that goal, that overall goal into small, more manageable goals? So maybe we break that into, over 12 months, 4 3-month blocks. Maybe we break it into 3 4-month blocks. And then with each of those 3 to 4 month blocks, we then have our micro. Oh, fuck, I just said blocks.
You said it 3 times. I'm counting. I'm keeping a tally, guys. Don't worry.
Damn it. And then within each of those 3 to 4 month cycles,
Yes.
we have our microcycle. So, how are we gonna break those 3 to 4 month? I was just gonna say blocks again. Holy shit. Okay, so let's firstly talk about the build program, because you don't have there's not a certain time where you're trying to peak your athletes. How do you decide on the macro cycle? How long is like the overall goal for, the big picture goal?
I think generally what I'm thinking is when I'm sitting down and when I first took on the build program, I look at our goals, right? So essentially, okay, what are we striving for? Who is our avatar? That we've always got a general avatar that we're trying to program for. So it's like taking a step back and trying to take that bird's eye view of what's the overarching goal of this 12-month period for the next year. Where do I want someone sitting now, and where do I want them to go? So generally, it's just looking at those goals. So like we talked about, we want to get them as strong as possible, right? We want to get them resilient. We want to develop their aerobic system, right, from all ends. So we're going to probably start really long. And over a 12-month period, we're going to probably try and intensify that to something a bit shorter. So that's the general overarching goals that I'm thinking of when looking at the build program.
Okay, so you said 12 months there. Why 12 months?
I think it's just easier because when you look at a calendar, it's 12 months, it's already there for you.
Nice. Okay, so then you've got this overall 12-month goal of what you're going to achieve. And I guess by the end of that 12 months, you're then going to reassess and decide what's the next 12 months going to look like. When it comes to mesocycles, so how are you then breaking up that 1 year block?
So then essentially we're working off cycles of, that's 4 times, guys. I hope you guys are keeping a tally as well. So generally we're working off.
Maybe we should just call it block, to be honest.
No, we decide non-cycle.
Okay, we'll
cycle it is.
Cycle is.
So essentially we're just looking at that 12-month, right? So generally what I do is I break it into manageable cycles, which is generally 3 to 4 months. This year, essentially, we've been doing 8-week cycles. So let's break that into 4 months. And from there, each of those cycles, I'm just choosing priorities, right? So I'm choosing some tests that we know that, obviously, when we're looking at our deadlift, where we're testing absolute strength, we're looking at a squatting pattern. What we're looking at absolute strength, or we're looking at muscle endurance and everything in between. Then we're looking at our single leg stuff. And we've got a list here at Coastal in the process programming with a bunch of FMEs that we've created, or litmus tests that we've created over the past couple of years. And we just get our list out and we just tick them off, right? We've tested that, right? Okay, where are we going from next? And essentially, once you've got that list of things, you've got a rough idea of priorities, then it just makes life easier.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that what we're trying to do, even though the build program has some specific goals here, we're trying to get people strong but also enduring, as well as building muscle, which is in between the two. We're doing some aerobic development. Generally speaking, the aerobic work we do, the build program, is a little bit on the longer end, a little bit less intense. Yeah. And I think, what a lot of training programs do is they try to attack everything at once. So they try to make sure that within a training cycle, there is a bit of everything. Now, sometimes that's good. But what we find from a longevity standpoint and ensuring long-term progression with training is that when you're getting too many doses of everything, you don't get enough doses of anything. And we know that for adaptation to take place, especially as someone's training age increases, or the longer they've been following a training program, as soon as that starts to increase, the amount of exposure we need to a certain type of stimulus actually starts to increase. And if we're just trying to give people little doses of everything, we may not actually get anything to improve enough. And this is actually something we see in most CrossFit programs as well. So what we're doing on the build program here is we're picking just, how many priorities do you pick in a training cycle?
Probably go 3 to 4 maybe.
Yeah, so over like an 8-week phase, we're picking 3 to 4, 3 to 5 things that we say, okay, the goals of this next cycle, of the next 8 weeks, is we're going to try to get people really good at these 3 to 5 things. When that cycle finishes, we just simply pick the next 3 to 5 things and we get after that. Yeah. Do you want to give me some examples of what those 3 to 5 things might look like?
So for example, on our last cycle, we tested our deadlift 5RM. So we tested some absolute strength in the hinging pattern. So we placed our squatting absolute strength on what we would call maintenance. So we were still getting touches of our squatting within that last cycle, but the focus wasn't, okay, we're going to build to a 5 rep max at the end of this cycle. So squatting was on maintenance and priority was hinging absolute strength. We finished that cycle, we tested our hinging absolute strength, which was 5RM. We went into the next cycle and we just simply flipped that over, right? So now the priority going into this new cycle is a back squat 5RM, and now our hinging now simply just moves to maintenance.
And the really cool thing about that is that at the end of these 2 cycles, you've got a data point for all your athletes on their deadlift 5RM, and you've got a data point for all those same athletes on their back squat 5RM. And we also have percentages, generally speaking, that we kind of look towards trying to hit when we're comparing someone's back squat to deadlift. So it even gives us even more data to then be able to ask ourselves, having finished this 16 weeks, do we have, if we're trying to get our athletes to be as structurally balanced as possible, which is generally the goal for both of us in these 2 programs, do we need to prioritize more squatting or do we need to prioritize more hinging? Yeah, and I really like that. So in that case, you talked about prioritizing a deadlift and a back squat, and then you flipped it. What other things were you prioritizing in those cycles?
So we had, let's take the cycle before. So we tested our 3 rep max weighted V-bar dip. So we're testing some horizontal pressing, absolute strength. We now going into this next cycle, we're just it's just very easy when we're working off like that structural balance. We're just flipping it now. Now we're looking at a vertical pull, so weighted, pronated grip. We're going to go 3RM. So we've now got some data on our athletes where they're sitting with their absolute strength V-bar dip. Now we're going to gather some data on our 3 rep max pronated pull up. And then we can see, right, is there a discrepancy there? Are we really strong at pressing and not so strong at pulling? So that means that maybe in the next cycle we need to prioritize, just like we would do with the back squat and the deadlift, we need to prioritize maybe some vertical pulling. How we would do that? We would maybe go into some longer, like another 8-week block of maybe really focusing on some like higher volume vertical pulling. After that 8 weeks, we may go back and retest that absolute strength vertical pulling.
Nice. And it's fun because it's just essentially the life cycle of the build program is essentially going back and forth between picking different priorities, trying to get people as structurally sound as possible, which means we're not creating imbalances in people, and just almost not rinse and repeating, but it's just a dynamic model where you're changing. Now, in those priorities you talked about absolute strength, the priorities in these last 2 cycles. But I also know that we do pick training priorities that are more hypertrophy based or higher volume based.
Yeah, so we've done cyclist squats. We've done a 20 rep max, which we're now looking at muscle strength endurance. We have tested 10 rep max. So basically when we tested our absolute strength, what I like to do as a coach is, especially when I know when I've mapped out my year and I've got some points where, right, I'm going to test my absolute strength hinging on a deadlift. Generally what I'll do is the cycles leading up to that 5RM, we're going to be doing a lot of hypertrophy work or higher volume. So I believe it was 2 cycles before the 5RM, we tested a 10 rep max barbell RDL. So right, okay, we've now tested that strength endurance or muscle endurance. Okay, then we just look at the strength continuum. Okay, where do we go next? We have now tested strength endurance, so we're just going to follow that strength continuum. Okay, strength endurance now moves to absolute strength. Let's see where we're at with our deadlift.
Yeah, and you're basically essentially working your way down from 10 reps towards 5 reps over an 8-week period.
Maybe in 8 weeks or 3 cycles, we can be looking at a 2 rep max.
Yeah. So fun, isn't it?
I love it.
So when I talk, the LIVE program is a little bit different. A lot of the same concepts apply. The only difference is that even though the goal of the program is not the CrossFit Open, we use a CrossFit Open calendar to define our 12-month macro cycle. So the reason for that is, number one, it's a really nice way to give us structure to a training year. We know that the closer we get to the CrossFit Open, our training, if we're talking about a general CrossFitter, our training is going to emulate the sport a little bit more. And what does that mean? It means we're probably going to bias a little bit more metabolic conditioning. Our absolute strength work is going to go a little bit more into maintenance mode, and we'll probably do a little bit less like isolated hypertrophy work. So if you were to think about that from like a classical strength and conditioning standpoint, that's like an intensification phase. Intensification phase with some conditioning dripped in there. So if you kind of work back from there, if that's what the last training cycle before the CrossFit Open is going to look like, what does it look like after the CrossFit Open? So when you just finish a CrossFit Open, you're basically starting the next 12 months. What does your training look like then? And for us in the Live program, that's where we're basically going to be rebuilding our foundations again. We're basically going to spend the next 12 months setting ourselves up so that in 12 months time, when we get back to CrossFit Open again, we are stronger, faster, fitter, more enduring, more well-muscled individuals that can handle greater levels of intensity and volume. And I've really liked that as a framework to actually give me some structure to actually design a program. You're going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that's my favorite time of the year when you're doing the rebuild.
I'm already looking forward to the rebuild.
For that bit, yeah.
As soon as open prep starts, I'm already like, can't fucking wait for the rebuild. That's more my body telling my brain, hey buddy, you need to get back to rebuilding.
So basically 3 weeks ago, Ed was already saying, can't wait for the rebuild. Can't wait for the rebuild.
So that's how we structure the Live program. It's a little bit different. We are working off a 12-month basis, but the time is actually all structured around the CrossFit Open. But essentially, it's very much the same concept. The only difference is when we have a much broader set of goals we're trying to improve our individuals at, because we have to play with the Live program. We've got to play with metabolic conditioning on a whole, and we have a whole range of different formats we're playing with. It's not just monostructural, which is mainly the build program, but we're also playing with mixed modal. So we're combining gymnastics with monostructural work, weight training or weightlifting with monostructural work, and in many ways and shapes and forms as possible. So that basically gives us a lot more options to play with when it comes to programming. But in terms of the general premise of how we go about it, it's very much the same. At the start of a training block, which is usually around 8, sometimes 16 weeks, we're basically going to pick a bunch of objectives. And for those in a CrossFit program, I like to kind of classify what those objectives are. So we may have an objective within like a weight training. So that might be an absolute strength objective. Maybe we're going to be lifting something heavy. It might be a strength speed objective. So we might be building to, let's say, a power clean, heavy single or heavy double. And then we may have like a gymnastics test. It may be in the Live program, like we're going to do a push-up capacity test. We're going to do a 5-minute AMRAP test or a 5-minute pull-up test at the end of this training block. And then we may have monostructural energy system training. We may have some targets we're going to set there. For example, we're going to test a 5K, or we're going to do a test within 8 to 10 minute realm using monostructural machines. And so essentially that's what we do. We're just gonna select according to where we are in the season and where we are in the year, some training priorities that we want to work towards, and then we just get after it. At the end of that cycle, we perhaps finish with some tests or some litmus tests to collect data and ask ourselves as programmers, okay, were we successful in achieving the goal that we set out to achieve at the start of this block? If we've set 5 objectives, maybe we nail 4 of them. But one actually we didn't deliver on. One, maybe we realized, maybe we didn't give enough exposure to that movement. Maybe we overdid that movement.
Maybe it was too much, right?
Maybe it was too much. And so what we may do for the next training cycle, and this is the dynamic approach to programming, is that, okay, with those 5 things, we can move on from those 4 because we were successful there. But I may hit another 8 weeks of this one thing to get it to the point where I think we can then move on and hit the next group of things.
And I think that's important to recognize when we're talking about, like we talked about yesterday, when we're talking about our periodization, like we can get very fancy with the macro cycle, we can get very fancy with the meso and the micro, but essentially we still need to stay dynamic, right? Like we talk about, it's that client-centric approach. You can have this fancy plan, but at the end of the day, life might happen for individuals or whatever it may be. Like it's good to have a plan, but don't be so rigid.
I mean, like a great example of that, writing the Live, Perform, Compete and Elite program is like gym closures and
There you go,
COVID. You know, we've had many. This is our 5th closure now here at Coastal, and we're not writing the program just for people at Coastal here, but there's been times where almost everyone in the world lost access to their gym when COVID first kicked off, and I think at that point in time, we were going through a rebuilding phase. We just finished the CrossFit Open last year. Or sorry, it was maybe even going into the CrossFit Open.
Yeah.
And we had to relook at our training plan because when we finished the cycle, which should have had our athletes achieving X, Y, and Z, because no one had gyms, no one had pull-up bars, mainly, people just weren't where we needed them to be.
Yeah.
And so luckily gyms then opened again, and we actually decided to repeat a lot of the priorities from that last cycle that people missed out on. So that's just another example of like why you have to be flexible. And the client-centric approach, we talk about this concept all the time, means it's great to have a plan on paper, and that provides you structure and gives you clarity as a programmer, but you need to always keep an eye on the people following your program and seeing if what you're designing is delivering what was intended. And if not, then you need to change and you need to adapt and you need to be flexible.
And I think in terms of like, I mean, I say it all the time, of course I'm biased, but I think that what we do again very well is in terms of the semi-individualized. So essentially what we've got our tracking system, which is WADUP, and essentially us as coaches, we're all assigned different athletes or individuals all over the world, and we're monitoring those results, right? And you know yourself, especially when you're doing your Live, Perform, Compete, Elite, once you see those numbers starting to see a few notes, felt really heavy, or felt really tired, just felt off. If that's a recurring theme, then use the program. You're thinking, right, well, I've got a deload maybe scheduled for 2 weeks. Maybe that's too late. Maybe I can bring that forward. And again, it's just another point to prove that you need to be dynamic as a coach.
And that exact example is something I've done a lot. And it might be because I follow the Compete program and I need to deload way earlier than I had a deload programmed. But I think that's also an amazing thing about doing your own program is you get to actually feel it. But I know that I'm less resilient than pretty much everyone else who follows the program, so I don't take my feelings necessarily for gospel. But you do definitely recognize, just recently actually, just a couple of weeks ago, we're in an intensification phase right now, prepping our Perform, Compete athletes for the Open. And they were just seeing a lot of similarities in feedback. It was like, this felt really heavy today, joint felt sore, I had to adjust this movement because something felt off. And I think, you know, when you just see a few of those popping up and you also look at your cycle and you're like, well, I'm in week 4 right now and I haven't deloaded and I've been steadily intensifying everything, that kind of makes sense. Okay, week 5, we're going to do not an emergency, but we're going to do an unplanned reduction in volume and intensity so we can crack on and make sure that we're ready for when we need to be ready for. Let's talk about once we've set up that 8-week cycle. So we've decided what the priorities are, what we want to get after. We said, okay, we're going to give ourselves 8 weeks to try and achieve this. Let's talk about now, you touched on this earlier, but how do we now break up the changes in volume and intensity within that 8-week cycle?
So essentially what I do in the build program is we've got an 8-week cycle. And I like to put the deload in the middle. So on week 5, after 4 weeks, now essentially when we are writing our program, generally speaking, we're going from volume to intensity, which just means simply we are linear progressing each week. We're increasing either the reps or we're asking our individuals to increase the loading. So essentially just progressive overload for 4 weeks, keeping it nice and simple. On week 5, so week 4 is essentially your intense week. We give the athletes or the individuals a week of deload, and then from week 6, 7, and 8, that again follows the same format as the weeks before, where it's volume. So that first week after deload, getting back into things, and we just slowly creep up that intensity. For generally, I will run the test of our priorities, so those metrics that we decided on week 8.
I think it's super important when you are taking a linear approach to programming that you do have those deloads scheduled in.
100%.
I know a lot of programs don't really program deloads, and sometimes this is maybe an advantage of having a constantly varied program is that the intensity, generally speaking, might actually be a little bit lower. Now, what I mean by that is that most people think about constantly varied exercise, aka CrossFit.com, and think that's not low intensity. But you have to understand if you're linearly progressing and making your training every week more intense than the last week, the amount of intensity in week 4 that you're putting your body under versus week 1 is substantially different.
Very different, yeah.
And so it's actually, you have to look at it more of the cumulative effect on the body and the nervous system when you're following linear progressions. And if you're not taking those deloads, having those deloads, that's just, there's going to get to a point where actually you can't put more load on the body without giving it a bit of a break, and then essentially giving you a chance to kind of make some adjustments to the program and then rebuild again.
I mean, we've tried in the past. I've also played around with different approaches to this, and what I've found is that we've tried to do 8 weeks and then deload after week 8. But I've found that when you're trying to linearly progress something for 8 weeks, you get to week 8 and maybe it's test week. People have got nothing else to give, right? So I think we've played around with different approaches, and the approach that we've got now seems to work the best.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking back to not that long ago, probably 2 cycles ago, where one of the objectives for our live, perform and compete was to build to a heavy, it was a clean and push press for our live program.
Yeah.
And it was a clean and jerk for our perform and compete programs. And in the program, we were going to test the clean and jerk in week 8. And in week 7, I gave people a chance to build to something heavy, which was meant to be like a prep for the test the following week. What actually happened was that on that week 7, everyone PR'd.
Yeah.
And in week 8, when people were supposed to actually test, no one had anything.
Nothing left.
People weren't able to hit even 90% of what they'd hit the following week. So that was just a great example. Like, okay, actually week 7 in this case was actually when I needed to peak and put the test in. So it would have been better for me to test in week 7 and then deload in week 8. And this is just a beautiful thing about programming. It's so dynamic and it evolves and changes all the time.
It's never set in stone.
It's never set in stone. It could be just like the stimulus of that 7 weeks before it. It could be like that, the certain things you decided to focus on that block were just more fatiguing than the previous block.
Or it could be like, I mean, when you look at it from an even bigger view, it could be it was over Christmas. It was the summer holidays. People were in and out, or there was COVID, like in Hong Kong, obviously. We've had a lot of closures, we've had a lot of restrictions. Maybe people's moods are down. Like, you've got to look at this from a macro view, right?
When you first started programming with the build program, what were your biggest challenges? Like, as a person programming for a big group of people, what are the challenges?
I think you just mentioned it right there, is in terms of when you think that you're programming for everyone, things can get very complicated in your head. So I think just reeling yourself back in, picking one avatar, 1 or 2 avatars, a general, you close your eyes, you can see one, right, this person, I'm programming for this person, and that's helped me massively. When I used to go in and thinking, right, we've got 40, 50 people I'm programming, what about this person, they can't do that, what about this person, they can do this, and it just became like fucking a mess in my head. So just pulling myself back in and just understanding, right, well, it is essentially, it's a group program. Yes, it's semi-individualized, but we can only do so much, right? We program for one person, and hopefully that works, right?
I think that's where the prerequisites are so important, just to give you that confidence. The challenging thing for the live program, which is different from the perform compete program, the perform compete and the elite programs has a very specific set of prerequisites, and the prerequisites tell me where the lower end of performance is, but it also tells me where the upper end of performance is. Because with the perform program, the upper end, if they're going beyond that, they'll be in the compete program. In the compete program, if they're going to the upper end, they would be in the elite program. So I have like a buffer to know, like, okay, every male and female in perform program will be able to, at a minimum, lift this, and at a maximum probably lift this, and the same for the other programs. The thing is with the live program is that we know what the minimum is, but the maximum is actually quite high. We have a really big range of ability levels in the live program. So from a programming standpoint, especially when it comes to like programming loads for workouts, I'll always program based upon the minimum, and in the notes give people the options to scale up. We're never giving options to necessarily scale down because we're programming based on the minimum, and that's definitely something that's very different and quite a challenge for the program. Yeah,
and I think in terms of something came to my mind is that when you're not programming for a certain event, like, so we're not working off the CrossFit calendar. We're not essentially trying to peak our individuals for a certain point in time. Sometimes as a coach, that can get quite confusing. It's like, how am I going to periodize this thing? How am I going to choose priorities? But again, just going back to your goals, and our goal is look good, move well, we want longevity, we want structural balance. So we get our list out and we've got general metrics that we want to hit. And then again, like we talked about before, you're just ticking them off. But I think if we take the approach of we're trying to peak for something, sometimes that can actually be easier as a coach, because we know, right, we need the individuals or these athletes to be at their best at this point in time.
And that's why I like having the CrossFit Open as the calendar, even for the Live program, is that I know what an individual, if they wanted to do the CrossFit Open, even on the skin and scale division, what they need to be able to do. They need to be aerobically fit. Yep. They need to be able to move light to moderate loads. They need to have a high level of technique and efficiency in the movements that are required on the equipment list. And they need to still possess some decent level of absolute strength, because there's going to be a heavy lift in there somewhere. And because I have those specifics on what they need to do by the time the open rolls around, I simply just work backwards from that. So for me, like the start of the preseason is going to be a lot of structural balance work, a lot of time and attention, a lot of bodybuilding, a lot of isolation work that we haven't done in the intensification phases, and a lot of like easier energy system training. We're not going to be doing all that much intense work at all, basically just rebuilding those foundations. Let's talk about the concept of accumulation versus intensification. So when we talk about accumulation versus intensification, what we're generally talking about is accumulation. If we were to generally summarize it, we're saying that we're generally doing lower intensity work, higher volume work. So in resistance training, that makes sense. Lighter loads, more repetitions. From an energy system standpoint, we're talking about less intense, longer durations. When we talk about intensification phases, it's just the opposite of that. So we're talking about heavier loads or more intense resistance with lower volume, because those two things are inversely related. And from an energy system standpoint, this is maybe where we're doing more intense bouts. Yeah. In accumulation work, this is where we might be doing things like more movement or technique or skill mobility work, right, or isolated skill work. In intensification phases where we're focusing a little bit less on technique and skill, we're focusing a little bit more on being a bit more intense with the movement. So this is an important concept because this applies to both of our programs. Yep. Essentially what we're doing in the year on both our programs is we're moving through general phases of accumulation, and then we're moving through general phases of intensification. So I think in your case, the example of building to a 10 rep max Romanian deadlift would be a good example of more accumulation style training. Yep. And then you follow that up by going into an intensification phase where you then built to a 5 rep max deadlift. Yep. Any thoughts to share?
No, I think it's just what we talk about all the time, because we sometimes get confused between accumulation and intensification. Intensification just means that it has to be intense to whatever the person or the individual you're working with was before, right? Because we can get caught up in looking at programs and that must be accumulation. Well, we don't know what was the program before, what were they doing before. As long as that's more intense, then that is an intensification. Now, when we're talking about skills, for example, in the Live program or the Perform and Compete, that accumulation is where we're developing those skills, or essentially we're trying to build that house, right? We're building the structural balance, we're building the skills. We get the intensification. We're now trying to express maybe that strength in a more fatigue setting, or those skills maybe in a more fatigue setting, right?
And I know for all of our programs, the goal is longevity. We talk about longevity all the time, which means that even in our performance-based programs, we want people to achieve their goals, but we're not willing to sacrifice short, medium, or long-term health in the process. So we're looking for slower gains here, essentially, in a more sustainable way. And when you look at accumulation versus intensification work from a health perspective, generally speaking, accumulation work is going to err more on the healthy side. Yep. It's a little bit less intense, a bit nicer on the body. There's a lot less fatigue that's built up during an accumulation phase. Intensification cycles are going to be a little bit more taxing on the body, going to be a little bit more draining, going to have a little bit more of an impact on health. So generally how we're structuring our ratios of accumulation to intensification work, we're going kind of like a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1, I'd say would be a safe bet. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think on the build, we're generally around a 3 or a 1. Like 3-to-1, so 3 weeks of accumulation into 1 week of intensification. I've even seen cycles on a 3-day intensification. Like it doesn't matter the time as long as it's just more intense to what they were doing before, right?
Yeah. So when I look at the start of the year, furthest away from the Cross Open for the Live program, we're probably moving more towards like 3-to-1s, maybe even 4-to-1s, more accumulation work. And then we know it's important we do a little bout of intensity to make sure people don't lose touch with those important facets of fitness. But then As we get closer towards across the open, we may move to more like a 2-to-1.
So now, right now, it's like what? Are you on a 3 week or?
Well, we've now been on this is a 6-week like
6 week.
intensification cycle. We've got the CrossFit Open coming up next week. How crazy is that? Next week, and then our live folks will be on a nice big, I would say probably like a 16 to 21 week accumulation phase, just rebuilding those foundations. Awesome. I think the very last piece for us to talk about is obviously Liam, yourself, and myself are quite geeky about the stuff, and we love it and we get super excited about it. And maybe for those listening, some of you would have understood these concepts. Perhaps you're a coach or you're someone who's interested in programming yourself, and this would have made sense. Obviously, our biggest job is trying to take these broad, confusing concepts and deliver them to our athletes and our clients who follow it in a simple, easy to understand, easy to digest process. And so education is such a massive part of all of this being able to be successful, because like you said, what we could know that something on paper is awesome. Yeah. It's going to deliver, or going to get this client to arrive at the goals we set out to achieve. But when the client or the athlete receiving it sees it on paper, they may think, oh, that looks pretty boring. Where's the fancy stuff? Why am I doing 10 reps of split squats and I'm not doing a back squat, which is what I love to do? And I think that's where putting the time into education on intention is so, so important. We always talk about our goal is to educate all of our athletes, subscribers, affiliates on the why, what, and how behind everything we do. Do you want to shed some light on that?
No, I think essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to empower our members or our subscribers, right? At the end of the day, like, we love fitness, but what we want is the end goal is autonomy, right? Now that autonomy can look like 6 months, can look like 6 years, can look like 16 years. But at the end of the day, essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to fill the client's toolboxes with as many tools as possible so they can essentially go and navigate this thing on their own, right? What does that look like? They'll be then doing their fitness in their maybe garage gym, and they're then teaching their kids or they're teaching their neighbor, and that's essentially how we have impact on this bigger picture, right? We fill them with tools. Toolbox is full, they go out and they do this on their own, and they then teach someone else, and that for me personally, that's true impact, right?
I couldn't put it any better myself.
Thank you.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap this up, Liam.
Let's go.
Liam, thank you very much for being a part of this.
Welcome.
I'm looking forward to getting back on here and talking about the Perform and the Compete program.
Let's go.
Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers.